to be on us, watching over us. Oh, dear Lord, we thank Thee for Thy protection. We thank Thee that in Thee we live and move and have our being. Help us to know this and to be able to feel Thy life around us and to sense Thy heavenly messengers watching over us. In the name of Jesus Christ. It really is true, you know, about His watching over us. True in the most remarkable way. If we are on the beam, we are protected. Oh, I could just tell you more stories about protection. Go on and on forever. There are ever so many of them in my book. Not long ago, I was coming down the steps one evening. Quite high steps, cement steps, and I missed the last step. I mean, there wasn't any light there, and I didn't know there was a step there. You know how it is when you step, you think you reached the bottom, and you haven't. And so... watching over us. True in the most remarkable way. If we are on the beam, we are protected. Oh, I could just tell you more stories about protection. Go on and on forever. There are ever so many of them in my book. Not long ago, I was coming down the steps one evening. Quite high steps, cement steps, and I missed the last step. I mean, there wasn't any light there, and I didn't know there was a step there. You know how it is when you step, you think you reached the bottom, and you haven't. And so I started to fall, and I was just at an angle like that, and there wasn't a thing to hold on to, nor anyone near to me, and something just caught me in the midair and righted me up. I don't know how that... I mean, it wasn't possible. It just physically wasn't possible at that angle for me to right myself and stand up again, but... just did. And I couldn't help thinking of that verse, He shall give His angels charge over thee, to keep thee in all thy ways, they shall bear thee up in their hands, lest thou dash thy foot against a stone. Did I tell in the book about the lady in England who was spending the night someplace? You know, I must read that book someday. I forget it. It's the truth, I haven't read it since it was printed. I haven't looked inside the printed copy. I haven't had time. Well, I don't think I told that story. This is true. Well, this woman in England who went to visit, and she was to spend the night downstairs in a dank, sort of a dismal-looking bedroom. And when she got in the door, she just had the horrors. She just felt she couldn't spend the night in that room. And it was so strong a hunch that she obeyed it and told her hostess she was sorry, but she just had to go home. Well, the hostess was rather annoyed and didn't offer to send the coachman and the buggy or whatever it was, and she had to walk 4 miles home through the woods, but she went home. She wasn't going to stay there. And the next day, they cleaned up that room and ripped up the bed, and they found a nest of little vipers at the foot of the bed. Some snake had gotten in there, and all these little tiny vipers had hatched in the foot of the bed. Now you see, the angels were taking charge of her, His guardian angels were taking charge over her, and somehow she was guided and knew in her subconscious mind that she just wanted to spend the night in that room. So, those things are true. And I know I did tell in the book ever so many stories about our boys in the war who were protected. You know, we didn't lose a single one. We had 130 of our men and boys in the war, and not a hair of the head of any of them was touched. Not a one. Not a one. Someone said about George McNeil, said, "What is it? That boy leads a charmed life." Why, he said, "I've seen him getting off of the landing tank in the very forefront. He was on the very first tank that landed in 4 different invasions, all of the invasions during the war. George is right in the front. Said, I've seen him get out of there, holding his musket over his head and wading through the water, and shot and shell just falling on every side of him, and he said, I swear they're deflected, nothing touches him. That he leads a charmed life. Well, I thought that's a fairly good way of expressing it. He walks in the circle of light, walks in the circle of protection. And now I tell you, some people don't approve of that. But if it is brought about in the right way, there's every reason why we should approve of it. Some people think, oh, that's just some kind of a trick. People have this or that way of thinking that protects them, and it's not really fair. You see, one's protected, another isn't. Well, it's not like that. It's not like that. There is a lot more to it than that. I don't know how you work it out. You can work it out any way you want to, but I know the way we worked it out in our church. And the group of us women that prayed for these boys every day, we had their names up in the chapel, and there were some of us that went in there. And the whole congregation prayed for them. There was a prayer we all said out loud together for those whom we love who are far away from us, that they might be protected. And I know the way we worked it out was, in the first place, living the kind of a life that gave us a right to pray that, or trying our very best to live the kind of life that gave us a right to pray that and to claim it. And in the second place, also praying for the protection of every other mother's son. We didn't ask just for our boys to be protected, you see. We prayed, and we never prayed for victory. And we never, those of us who put this circle of light around those boys, we never in any way did anything to help the war. Of course, some things we had to do. We had to pay our taxes, had to register, and so on. Now, I'm not saying you have to do that. As I told you before, I'm not strictly a pacifist or a conscientious objector. I don't belong to any groups or isms or anything like that. But I am just telling you the plain fact, which is that when you do that, that is when you keep your own self clear from war guilt just as much as you possibly can, keeping out of everything that you can possibly keep out of, and repenting for the part that you can't keep out of, and being sorry for it, and offering sacrificial service as a token of your repentance, doing something, that is, to make up for the fact that you can't help, in a sense, belonging to it. When you do that, why then, the other works, you see. That's not something you can say everywhere or to everybody, and I didn't really mean to start in on that tonight, but that, I think, is the explanation of why nothing happened to a single one of them. I had a friend, Jeannie, who was rather spiritually sensitive. If any boy was reported missing, Jeannie and I would go in the chapel and we'd say a prayer for him, and I'd say, Jeannie, do you see him? Because I know it sounds funny, but she could see him in her mind, see a little picture. I don't know just how. She'd say, yes, I see him. He's sitting in the corner of a barbed wire fence, and she described what kind of clothes he has on, sitting on a wooden box there, and he looks very thin and tired and unhappy, but he's not sick and he's all right. And we tell the parents, and they know he was all right. That was Johnny, somebody she saw that about, and he came back. It was 6 months before anyone heard from him, but we didn't worry about Johnny anymore. We prayed for him every day, but we knew he was all right. He was all right. They went through everything and every place through the whole campaign on Guadalcanal, some of them in Okinawa, and the whole thing, and they were protected. That circle of light held around them all the time. Sometimes the boys themselves knew it, and sometimes they didn't. I don't know how much they knew it. Mostly we just put that circle around them at the church. And of course, at every service in the church, that's one of the things we did, and most especially the most powerful service that we feel. Of course, now I'm going to talk like an Episcopalian for a few minutes, but that's because Episcopalians, 2 or 3 Episcopalians here, have asked me to do so. So I'm answering their question. Tonight I'm just answering various questions as well as I can remember them. Questions from this one, that one, and the other one that have come up, tying up loose ends. So various of them have asked me to explain the communion service and the healing power that's in it. Well, of course, it isn't only healing power, it's protecting power. I mean, it adds power to every prayer, the way that we feel about the communion service. And I don't know why it can't be the same in every church. I mean, a thing is, as Paul said so beautifully the other day, a thing is what you make it. I mean, God answers your expectation. If you in your own churches, no matter how the service is conducted and no matter what anybody else thinks, still, if you dare to believe that you're actually receiving strength and life and protection and help out of that service, why, I believe that you can. Now, that first came to me, all these things I just sort of find them out as I go along. And so that came to me one time when I woke up in the morning with an awful attack of intercostal neuralgia, quite a violent pain through here. And I'd had it once before, and this minister had come and said a prayer for me, and it had hurt terribly for an hour afterwards, gotten much worse, gotten violently worse. I told you how that sometimes will happen for an hour afterwards, but I wasn't at all scared because I knew that that was the power working there to make it better. I couldn't lie down or sit up, so I kind of half crushed on one arm until it stopped, and then it stopped instantly, just perfectly. If I'd been scared, it might have kept on hurting. A much longer time, I don't know. But anyway, I wasn't, so it stopped instantly. But this morning, I couldn't get hold of him. There wasn't time, and there wasn't time to get a doctor, and I had to get up and get breakfast and get dinner and wash the dishes and get the children to Sunday school and teach the Bible class and go to church and do various other things. And so I just thought, well, I'll have to go to the communion service, which I always do anyhow. And if that really is the life of Christ in that sacrament, then I don't see why that life of Christ couldn't get me well if I put my mind on it. So I went to the communion service, and I noticed for the first time what the priest said. Of course, I'd heard the words before with my ears, but I hadn't just exactly applied them. I noticed that as he gave me the bread and the wine, he said, "May this preserve your soul and body unto everlasting life." You couldn't say a bigger affirmation than that if you tried for 1,000 years now, could you? Preserve your soul and body unto everlasting life. That covers everything in this life and in the next, all the way through. Every spiritual value, every physical value. So I thought, well then, I'll just ask him to send this power that's here, present in the bread and the wine, into this intercostal nerve and make it well. So I did, and nothing happened right then. But by the time the service was over, possibly 15 minutes, it was entirely well. The pain went entirely away. Completely, entirely away. Now, that ties up with something that I mentioned before. Now I'm answering another question. Someone else said they didn't just understand what I meant by the blood of Christ, and I said, well, who does? I don't understand either. All I feel is that there is a certain value in that. You can figure out your explanation any way you want to. So while I don't understand it, though, sometimes I think of little pictures or similes that make it a bit clearer. I feel that it's something like this. It's something like what happens to water in a tea kettle. You boil the water in the tea kettle, and when it comes to a boil, then that water changes its form. It comes out in the form of steam. It's not water anymore, and yet it is water. You see, it's the same thing, H2O, but it isn't. But there it is in the form of steam. You can see it, but it's different from the water. And after a while, that steam disappears in the form of vapor, and you can't even see it anymore. It isn't anything. And yet it is. It's still there. You can't see it, you can't touch it, you can't feel it, but it's still there. And if it meets the proper conditions, that is, if it comes in contact, for instance, with a cold window pane, it will once more turn into the form of water. It will condense on the window pane and drip down in the form of water. And it's the same water that was in the tea kettle, just exactly the same. Now you see what I mean? In some extraordinary manner that we do not understand, Jesus Christ actually generated in his own being the very life of God made man. The alternating current, you might say, of the life of God. The direct current of the life of God is everywhere. Heaven and earth is full of it. His rain shines, falls on the just and on the unjust, and the sun shines on everybody, and his love is open to everybody, regardless. Anyone who opens his mind and heart to it can receive it. Anybody. But then besides that direct current of the life of God, there is something else. As I said once before, a deeper and swifter and more human current of God's life. Like the Gulf Stream within the ocean. Now you can call that anything you want to, but I'm just using a comparison. I compare that to the alternating current of God's life. It's both human and divine. Both human and divine. Somehow or other it has in it our human personalities made divine. And Jesus Christ, in some way that I do not understand, so formed that and made it and incarnated it inside of himself. And then it seems to me that it may be possible, don't believe this if you don't want to, but it seems to me it may be that he actually left that force on this earth when his blood was shed. But it didn't stay in the form of blood very long, naturally, of course. Just like the steam that comes out of the tea kettle. For just a brief moment you can see it as steam, but very soon it vanishes away and you can't see it anymore, and it disperses itself all over everywhere. All over everywhere. It goes on and on. If it's not held in by windows, it goes on up into the air, and you have no way of telling where it is or where it goes or where it winds up. No way of telling at all. And yet it's real. It does not disappear. It still exists in this earth. And so that's just a comparison. Could it be possible, do you suppose, that the actual energy, current of energy, of healing energy and forgiving energy and protective energy and every kind of energy that Jesus Christ released for us, very soon changed its form. For a brief moment it may have appeared as the water and the blood out of his body. But very soon that was changed, but it disappeared, so it seems to me. The spiritual energy that was locked up in it, you might say, disappeared and scattered itself all over the world, everywhere. You can't tell where it is. It's everywhere. But you can tell where it can come. You don't know where it comes from or how it comes. But if you ask for it in faith, then that life can come. Now, there are various ways of asking for it in faith, ways which we've been talking about. That's the current of life that heals, one of them. When I'm praying with people for healing, I deliberately and purposely call on both currents of life, both the direct and the alternating. I use both the general life of God and also the personal life of Jesus Christ. And if I think the person I'm praying with doesn't understand the second, I don't say it out loud, but in my heart I'm still calling on it. But sometimes I call more on that and sometimes the other, and I don't know why. I really don't know the difference. I must remember what Albert Day said about out of the mouths of babes and sucklings, because intellectually I do not understand these things, I just feel them somehow. But I know that one way, this I am sure, that one way of receiving the life of God made manifest through Jesus Christ is in the communion service. Now I know that because he said so. He said, "This is my body, this is my blood." And I take it that that's a very powerful affirmation. That's a very powerful and dramatic, some of us may think a little crude. I mean, why did he use those lowly, grubby things, bread and wine? Why did he use those as symbols? Why didn't he think of something a little more esoteric and spiritual and so on? Well, I guess because he knows our frame, he remembers that we are dust. And he knows that a symbol so simple, so lowly, so crude as that, is one that the very simple in heart can understand. Let the highly intellectual people figure it out for themselves. He seems to be more concerned with giving it to the very simple in heart. Anyway, whatever the reason may be, I don't know. But I know he did say that. And I know that that's what he meant. That's what he meant. Now, why do I know that? Same reason I know anything, and that is because it works. Even if it's only the fact that I know it that makes it work for me, nevertheless it does work. Even if it's not a channel, but only a symbol, you see. And that is possible. If you want to figure it that way, all right. But even if so, the point is it does work. It can become a continuing source of receiving the life and the forgiveness and the healing of God, and not only that, but of giving the life and the forgiveness and the healing of God to somebody else. And it has become for me, much the most powerful one that there is. Much the most powerful. Because you see, I believe that when I go and receive the elements, in the first place, I believe that when they are blessed, now in the Episcopal Church, the service about them is quite long and elaborate, but when you put the meaning in it, it's very, very important, all of it. And at one time, the priest holds them up and consecrates them. There's a prayer of consecration. I forget just exactly the words, but the idea of it is that at that time, when he holds them up and consecrates them, then the miracle happens. Then the life, the divine life, enters in, and they are infused with a kind of a very concentrated thought vibration or power of Jesus Christ himself. Now, you can't prove that anyway except by making it work. If you look at it under a microscope, it's just the same. It doesn't change in any way. It's bread and wine. It doesn't change. No scientist could find any change in it. You can't see the change at all. But nevertheless, a different kind of a spiritual energy does seem to enter into it. In fact, I don't think I'm imagining when I tell you that you can feel the difference in the church as soon as that happens. I know I'm not imagining. I know I'm not imagining. Because when I go into a church in which there is a reserved sacrament, and that means that people feel so strongly the presence of Christ in the bread and the wine that they keep some of it constantly and perpetually on the altar with a little light burning under it. Why, you could lead me into a church like that blindfold and I'd know it was there. I can tell the difference. I can feel the difference in the air. I know it's there. One time I took Harry, the boy I've told you about before, you know, to the communion service. Harry hasn't been confirmed yet. Says he doesn't think he's quite good enough yet, and he's kind of stalling on that. I know he will be before too long. So he was not in a position to receive the communion. It's very important not to receive the communion until a person is prepared. If you rush out a thing before you know what you're doing, you can spoil the effect of it. When you do know what you're doing, it's lost. It's become common. So I'm glad I belong to a church that's strict about that. So he couldn't receive. He just sat there. But I said afterwards, Harry, what did you think about that service? He said, well, what happened? He said, I thought at first it was going to be just the same as the morning prayer, but it wasn't. At a certain point in the service, all of a sudden, something changed, and there was an entirely different kind of a power in the church. I said, what was the different kind of power? I don't know, but it was something different. You see, something does happen at that time. Sometimes I'm not very spiritually perceptive, and I very seldom see anything like a light, but sometimes I see it at that moment. Sometimes, very briefly, around the cross and around the vessel, I see it at that moment. So then you see, if you believe that, if you feel that to be true, then when you receive that into you, you can understand that that invisible and intangible sort of a life coming into you condenses again, you see, like the water, condensing again into water. There's nothing, there's only vapor, you can't see it, you can't touch it, but when you make the proper conditions, it condenses again and turns into water. So now, it's the life of Christ, I do believe. You can't see it, you can't touch it, there's nothing you can put your finger on, but when you receive it in faith, I believe that it condenses again inside of you and becomes his very being inside of you, so that he can dwell in you and change over your personality and push you aside, much as you'll let it, and fill up your very being with himself, so that really and truly you're not yourself anymore. You are dead to self, but alive in Christ. Only you don't know you're dead to self, you forget all about it. It's just that Christ becomes more and more alive in you. And you don't think anything more about your personality and how it may be changing, except once in a while when you realize you're not going so well, and then it's time to check up. But usually you don't think anything about it, because Christ just more and more manages somehow, in spite of our frailty and smallness, somehow or other he manages to push aside the barriers of our personality and himself abide in us, thinking his own thoughts in us, feeling his own feelings in us, feeling his own love in us, according to his will. You know, I don't know whether you've noticed or not, but I don't think I use that word as often as some people do, the word love, and I don't quite like to, because it is a word that is so misunderstood and so abused, really. But at one time, when I used it so little, because I was rather afraid to, that there wasn't too much of it flowing through me, I began to pray for more of the love of Christ, and this is how I prayed. I formed an undercurrent of prayer, which I carried on for quite a while, quite some months. You know, at times you can do that. If there's one special thing that you feel is your spiritual need, you can form an undercurrent of prayer. I mean, you can have one prayer that's like a refrain that goes through your subconscious mind, and every time your mind comes back to rest, it comes back to rest on that, you see. Every time you wake at night, you say that over and over. Every time you travel on buses and trains, whenever you're not busy thinking about something else, you say that over and over. You know, one thing I love about this place is you don't have to listen to radios. Honestly and truly, I do hope none of you are going to get mad now because you're in the radio business or something, but really, to have to relinquish the mind that God gave you to listen to somebody else's chatter from morning to night, I just can't understand it. I just can't see how anybody could possibly do it. I mean, when the Spirit of God could speak into you, why listen to some announcer or somebody else blabbing away? Oh dear. It's all right for people that have nothing else to fill their minds, but when you do, it seems to me it's an awful waste of God's time. So, at this time I formed the undercurrent of this prayer. Dear Lord Jesus, please abide in me more and more, filling me with your own love and directing that love according to your will. You see, not according to my will. Well, I found myself loving some of the funniest people. I mean, really and truly, things did change. I found that my affection for people broadened out very considerably, and that it was apt to concentrate itself, because some people do need more love than others. That's quite true. And it was apt to concentrate itself upon the ones that nobody else probably cared about too much. That's why I'm always telling you stories about these perfectly ignorant and some of them perfectly no count fellows that I find in hospitals and taxi drivers and so on. Well, that happened after I began praying that prayer. Love is a terrific energy. Now, this is something that just came to me. I don't know what you think of it. But I think it's not quite safe to pray for the love of Christ too much unless we are very, very careful that we also pray at the same time that He directs that love. Because it's apt to just spend itself on somebody personal to us, you see. We are it's so hard for us to not be possessive and want something for ourselves, you see. So I think if we're going to do a lot of praying for the love of Christ, it's a very good idea to at the same time ask Him to direct that love, sending it to the people that He wants it to go to. Now, how did I get off on that? I didn't mean to talk. I didn't have time to prepare this talk, so I haven't the least idea what in the world I will get off to. Oh, I know, I was talking about the communion service, and about the healing value, and the forgiving value, and every kind of value that can be received in that communion service. Well, shortly after that, I'll tell you one more thing. So the next time that I woke up in the morning not feeling good, you see, this was during the years when I was battling with Satan. I'm going to tell you now that when you first start trying to live by the laws of God and of faith, you may have already found it out. When you first start, just watch yourself. Because Satan or the power of evil or the old thought habit or whatever it is, I don't care what it is, but whatever it is, it will be just after you everything. I mean, for a while, that doesn't last forever, but you sort of go through a time when it seems as if some contrary power honestly uses every possible scheme that he can think of to upset you and throw you. During that time, all kinds of things. I was trying to get over this mental and nervous depression, but all kinds of other things happened, which I won't bore myself by telling you all. So one morning, the next time, I woke up Sunday morning with an attack of grip, and I thought, now I know just what to do. I'll go to the communion service. That time it didn't work. No, it didn't work at all. So I thought about that, and I realized that God has common sense the same as anybody. And at that time, while I was keeping one of the laws of God, I was breaking another one. Because God gave us these bodies of ours for us to take care of. And He expects us to keep the physical laws and use our common sense, do you see? And when one is just coming down with a fresh attack of grip or something, and just in the stage of running up a high temperature, it's not sensible to climb out of bed and go out in the cold and go to church. And furthermore, it's not kind to other people to expose them to that thing, don't you see? Whereas when some people might be fearful of it, and so they might get it. And so I realized that I had broken some of the laws of God and trying to keep the other ones, and I realized that one has to make a balance and use one's common sense. Very important thing, using common sense, you know. One time in church I was praying for guidance. I forget what it was about. And I heard just like a voice inside. Only I don't know if it was the Holy Spirit or not, because it spoke in very ordinary language, but I did hear something just like a voice, and it said, I gave you a head, use it. Maybe that's my own imagination. And still, I think that there is a great deal of truth to that God expects us to use our heads and to use common sense just as much as we can. And after we've used that and done the very best we can with common sense, then we can ask Him for guidance. You know, when we pray for healing, this point comes up. Someone asked me this. What about doctors, and to what extent should we use doctors? Well, that's a very intelligent question, because it does vary quite a lot. And we really have to trust our own guidance to a considerable extent. But yet I might say this, when the disease is of such a nature that anybody knows, you know with your common sense, or any doctor would tell you, that it's dangerous to get up and go around, that your best bet is to keep still and give the body time to recuperate, then I think we should. I really don't think it's quite fair to make things harder for God by doing all kinds of rash and reckless things, don't you see, while we're praying to get well. In simple words, when I pray for anybody who is running a temperature and so on, I say, now don't get up until you've had one whole day without temperature, because after all, I think that's just only sensible. Now, if we try that and the trouble still continues and we want to have a doctor, that's all right. There's no reason in the world why we shouldn't. God made the doctors. Besides, He knows they've got to make a living somehow. And everything that they use comes from Him. And I think that's perfectly all right to to have a doctor. My own way is this. I first try, just for the fun of it, and also to save time, and also for the sake of the experiment, I first try and see if I can get over the thing by faith alone. But then if I try and don't succeed, then I do just go to a doctor. Because, in the first place, I find in myself an unwillingness to. I don't want to. I know that people would say, oh, well, here's Agnes sitting in the doctor's office. I thought she was supposed to be so smart and know how to keep well, don't you see? And so for that reason, I don't want to go to the doctor. But I figure that that's spiritual pride, and for that very reason, it'll do me good to go to the doctor. So I just go. And the other reason why I just go is because I don't want to waste the Lord's time. If I try to get well by faith alone and can't, well, all right, I'm off to be in someplace, and I'll get back on as fast as I can. But in the meantime, I just use every means that He has given me to get well. And when people come to me that need an operation, why, I tell them, we'll pray about this, and then you be guided, and if you get well real fast without it, that's all right. But unless you get well very fast without it, then we'll pray for the doctors and pray for them to be guided in the course of the operation and for everything to work out right. And you just go ahead and have the operation. And I think that that's a sensible kind of a thing to do, don't you? Oh, we used to be always in Moorestown, and they still are, I guess, for people who had operations. And the way the operations work out is perfectly marvelous. One time, for instance, a little girl there had only 3 and a half she was, and she had cancer of the lungs. And you know at that age, that is bad. And the doctors gave the parents not one ray of hope. They said the only thing they could possibly do would be to remove one lung, but that was such a dangerous operation, and she was already poisoned with it and running a high temperature and very ill, and they didn't know whether she'd live through the operation, but it was the only chance. So a neighbor went and told them about us. They didn't know about it. They were supposed to be Episcopalians, but they're the kind that only show up Christmas and Easter. And so they hadn't heard. And they were new in town. They hadn't heard. So they came around to the rectory, but we were away on vacation. So my son Ted answered the door. He's my Navy boy, but he used his head all right. He said, well, my father and mother aren't here. But that's okay. I'll get somebody else in the congregation to attend to it for you. So he thought, who should he call? And he called up my friend Marjorie. And he told about this boy, and he said, so I think you better take over and go to the hospital and see him. Marjorie said, why, Teddy, I can't do that. I've never done anything like that. She said, of course we all do, just for ourselves and our families, but I'd be scared to death. And Teddy said, well, somebody's got to. And he said, so I think you better. So at Teddy's command, Marjorie pulled herself together, and she got hold of the parents, and she took them in the chapel, because they were very terrified. This was an only child, and they were crying and weeping and so on and so forth. So she took them in the chapel, because the thought vibrations in the chapel are full of peace. And just to go in there gives you that feeling, as I explained once before. So they went in the chapel, whereupon the father turned to her with loud weeps and sobs and demanded that she say a prayer out loud. Marjorie said, oh, I thought I'd die. I've never said a prayer out loud in my life. You know, Episcopalians just don't. But but she said, I did, and it was a real good prayer, too. If I do say so, shouldn't, she said. And he stopped crying, and then they went to the hospital. The doctor, meanwhile, was a faithful and believing man, and he called a minister in the town to come there, and he knelt on one side of the bed and the minister on the other, and they prayed for this little girl. He didn't know anything about us in our church, but that was just his idea of how to do, and it was an awful good idea. So Marcia went and put her hands on the little girl and prayed for her to be well, and also for the doctors and so on. And then she went back and she got scared. She called up the secretary and she said, where is Mr. Sanford? Where is Agnes? I've just got to get hold of them. I'm getting cold feet. I've got to at least get them to work on this from a distance. But the secretary had strict orders not to tell anybody where we were. And so she said, no, she said, you can't do it. I'm forbidden to tell where they are. And she said, besides, we've been learning this thing for a long time. And if the congregation can't take care of this without bothering the minister and his wife, it's just too bad. Now, she said, I'll get Jeannie and Ruth and somebody, and we'll go in the chapel and pray while the operation's going on. And you get some other people up at your house, and you pray, and it'll be all right. Then she went home and went to bed, and she got scared and stayed awake most all night, wondering whether she'd done right or not. But anyway, that's what they did. And the little girl came through the operation so perfectly beautifully. She had it in the morning, and that very night she sat up in bed and ate her supper. And we got back home that night. That very night, and my husband went to the hospital to see her next morning at 11 o'clock and found her out in the hall waiting for her father to come and take her home. You know, that's what happened. And it was so perfectly amazing that the doctors called a convention. There were 70 chest specialists in Atlantic City, and they adjourned and came up to Camden on purpose to review the history of this case, which the doctor described with a little girl there, and telling him all of these prayer things that had gone on. Now, that's what happened. And the parents, from then on, will be different. Unfortunately, they were only in Moorestown a short time. They moved somewhere else. But the mother said, for the rest of my life, I'm going to sing in a church choir. She had a very lovely voice and had always been a paid singer. And she said, from now on, I'm going to sing in a church choir without any pay, wherever I live, as my act of gratitude to God for making little Jean well. And when she said that, then I knew that little Jean would stay well. Because you see, as I told you before, the life of God is a flow, it's a stream. It's a flow, it's a stream. It takes an act of gratitude to keep it flowing. Oh, I found that out long ago, and it was very sad, and it still is rather sad to me. I found out that some people would, anything would happen, they'd come see Agnes. I'd pray with them. Well, thanks a lot, goodbye. Next thing, they'd come see Agnes, I'd pray. Well, thanks a lot, goodbye. Come again. Gimme. Never thinking to, in any way, make any return either to me or to the church or to God in any shape, way, or form whatsoever. Well, the thing was, after a while, the power wouldn't flow anymore. And at first I couldn't imagine why it wouldn't flow. I wondered why in certain cases it would just stop. Just stop after a while. And then when I checked over which ones it was in which it just stopped, it was those ones in which there wasn't any act of gratitude at all. Of course, the very best act of gratitude is to go right straight and do for somebody else what's been done for you. Just to start right in and do for somebody else what's been done for you. But any other pleasant and gracious little things along the way do help to keep the power flowing. So, it's nice to know that it does flow like that. In fact, any way that we can remind ourselves that this power in this life is a flow, is a stream, is a wonderfully good one. Now, to get back to the communion service, after a while I found out that you could use that same thing, use the communion service and the healing power there for somebody else. And I never do it for myself anymore because I don't have time. It's always, in fact, I don't have time to pray for myself at all anymore. I always have too many other people to pray for it, so now I always use it for somebody else. Now, that seems funny. How can you receive that life of Christ in you and pass it on to somebody else? Well, you can. Episcopalians would understand it readily enough. You make some one person your special intention for that Sunday, and when you search yourself the day before to see if you are ready and prepared in spirit to receive communion, at the same time you perform some kind of penitential prayers or acts for that other person. Right there is where fasting comes in if a person wants to use it, don't you see? And then when you go there to the communion service, somehow you feel that you are carrying with you not only your own sins and wrongdoings that you want to be forgiven, but also those of this other person, which you have stood under. You have taken them on you and just stood right under them, and there you are holding them. And that, I'm going to tell you, is carrying the cross of Christ. Now, never mind whether you understand it or not, I'm not going to tell you any more about it. I don't want you to understand it too well right now, some of you, because I don't think you're quite up to it, to be quite frank. You've got to know the power way first. You've got to know how to toss it off afterwards, or else you'll walk around still carrying that burden. It's quite dangerous. So, I won't tell you any more about it now. But I just do want to say this one thing. Don't get mixed up on what carrying the cross of Christ is. I think people are getting over the idea now. But when I was a little girl, I used to hear people talk about carrying the cross of Christ, and they'd moan and they'd groan, and they'd have all kinds of aches and pains and whatnot. I used to hear about my cousin Betty Peenick. Oh, my mother said she was a saint. She was a sickbed saint. I always have low sickbed saints, don't you? And she was always sick. She always had migraine headaches, but she endured them so nobly. She was carrying the cross of Christ. And I thought in my mind, when I meet her, I bet she's a pain in the neck. When I met her, she was. I never met her all this time. Now, bless her heart, I hope I'm not being cruel saying this, because I know that she was a good and worthy soul. But I really don't feel that her hugging those headaches to herself and thinking that she was being especially spiritual because she was suffering all the time, and that it was a noble thing for her to have those headaches, and that she was carrying the cross of Christ by having those headaches. Now, the point is, she meant well, and I'm sorry I perhaps spoke unkindly of her. I shouldn't have done that. But still, no, I don't think she had been rightly informed and rightly taught. about what carrying the cross of Christ really is. Now, whatever we may or may not think it is, I think that already at this time we know that it's not just going around being sick. After all, Jesus didn't save the world by being sick. He never lay down and had a migraine headache and claimed that that was saving the world, now did he? So, no. He suffered under other people's sins and sickness, and that was saving the world. But just suffering for one's own isn't at all. So now just one or two more little suggestions, and that is, you've had a tremendous dosage of religion while you're here. It's a wonder it hasn't given all of you religious indigestion, not to mention a few other things. I think that you've borne up nobly under it. But I just want to tell you that when you go out from here, you must be very sure and get the right balance. We do the best we can here to keep a balance, but in spite of all we do, everybody is so steamed up and enthused about the religious end of it that it's pretty hard to keep any kind of a balance. But when you go out from here, go back very gently and very lovingly into the world. And don't try and keep yourself separate from the world. You can be in the world but not of it. You don't have to be of it, but you do want to go back into it. Don't try and keep yourself separate and think, well, now I mustn't be interested in these baseball games and these parties and these merely fleshly activities and these women's clubs and so on and so forth. We have a little tendency to be like that, you see. I went through a time of getting awfully bored with all such things. I didn't want to think of anything unless it was on a high spiritual plane. Believe me, that's a bad way to get. Because two reasons. One is it separates you from humanity, which is very bad. Not only does humanity need you, but you need humanity to keep on a level, you see, to keep balance. And the other reason is that it starves something inside of you. You become starved emotionally. You're overfed spiritually and starved emotionally. The Lord made us to be not only divine, but also human. Somebody said there's no use in anybody trying to be more spiritual than Jesus Christ. And he lived among people and enjoyed people. Yes, he did. Some people even criticized him, said he had too good a time, said he went to parties and ate too much and drank too much. Well, that sounds awful when you say it, and yet I love to think of that. I love to think that he enjoyed people and loved just ordinary human contacts with people so much that some people even thought that he went too far. They said, why, John the Baptist wasn't like that. He stayed out in the wilderness all the time by himself, you see. But Jesus loved people, loved to be with them in every possible way. And we do need that for balance. And so when you go back home, try and get into your life just as much fun as you can have. You young people, don't think you've got to, or you wouldn't, I'm sure, because you got loads of sense. But some people might think that they had to stay away from games and parties and so on like that, and just occupy themselves praying. Well, I know you all have more sense than that. If you pray too long, you get funny peculiars. My friend Jeannie says, enough prayer is enough and too much is plenty. I mean that seriously. I have known one or two people. One time on the West Coast, I was talking about someone with Alan Hunter. I was talking about that person's books and writings. That person, a very fine and worthy person, really advocated that a person should meditate about 4 hours a day. And I said, well, Alan, I know that if a person followed his system, something strange would happen to him. I said the creative instincts in him would either die out or they'd become abnormal, one or the other. And Alan just looked at me with his mouth open. He said, how did you know? Well, I said, I just know. Just from common sense. And he said, that's exactly what does happen. From knowing the people that tried that. Now, that may be all right, you see. There are some people that may be called to that when a person is older, when they're old enough so that they no longer need, so that they've had all the children that they want and they no longer need a normal life, why, that may be all right. But for most people, that is dangerous. And we don't need that. We don't need so much of intensive meditation and living apart if we have enough real friendliness toward common humanity. Just real friendliness. You know, somehow I like that better than in some places I like that better than the word love, because the meaning of it is plain and clear. Just real friendliness. And if we mingle with them and go among them and have that friendliness, they know it. We don't have to tell them we love them. I wouldn't have gotten very far in Fort Dix if I'd go around telling those men I loved them, believe me. They knew it. I didn't have to say anything. I never said anything like that. I never said a word of any description is that when you live among people in an ordinary, friendly way, somehow or other, at times you find you can pray there just wonderfully. I tell you, I can do as good praying in a big league baseball game as most any place I know. That's the truth, honestly. It is. I guess Tukey taught me that. Tukey taught me to go to a big league baseball game. She made me pray there. I'll have to tell you this. Has no particular point, but still I just have to tell you. Well, maybe it does have a point, too. I guess it does, because it shows how, when a young person grows up with a feeling of God, how natural and friendly and cozy the life of God is, so that it just enters into everything. But one time, the Phillies were playing against the Dodgers, and the Phillies were in the cellar as usual, and the Dodgers were next to the top. And Frank Hurst was pitching for the Phillies, and he never had won a game in his life up until that time. I forget who was pitching for the Dodgers, but he was a good pitcher. Well, anyway, miraculously, the game went on to the 7th inning, and nobody got a run. Everybody got more and more excited, we want to run, we want to run, we want to run, we want to run. So, the 7th inning came along, 2 men out, 2 strikes and 3 balls, and Skeeter Newsom was on third base. Tukey turned to me, and Frank McCormick came up to bat. Tukey turned to me, she says, "Oh, Mom, pray just this once, and after this, I promise you I'll leave it to the Phillies." Well, I had to pray. I couldn't help but pray. I didn't pray for Frank to hit the ball or for the Phillies to win, but I just prayed for God to come into Frank and help him to do his very best. Now, Len's prayed things like that, too, so I don't care if I can. And you know, he hit a home run and both of them got him. Tukey turned to me, she says, "Oh, Mom, isn't God a good sport? I asked for one run." She says, "I asked for 1 run and he gave us 2. And the next day, in the paper, when I was reading the write-up, I read Frankie Hurst's remarks, and he said that while he was sitting there in the dugout, waiting for him to go back and pitch again, he said, "I prayed as I never prayed in my life." Well, there you see now. It wasn't wrong to pray because he was praying too. Probably Frank McCormick was too, who knows. Anyway, I wouldn't make that a habit and a practice. I don't usually pray for the game, but I pray for the people. And I sort of use that as a symbol of America, and I don't know any lovelier symbol of America. Somehow it just means an awful lot to me. I love to watch the crowd. They're all free and easy and relaxed, They're all friendly with each other. Nobody's thinking about wars and things like that. Nobody's being gloomy. They're all carried away with excitement, and it just makes a perfectly wonderful place to pray for the world. So do crowds. I love crowds. I love crowds especially when nobody knows me, and I can go among them and just pray. I love crowds. In the summertime, we go away to Alston. About 2 or 3 weeks, I enjoy nature, and after about 3 weeks, I've seen all the birds and bees I want to see for quite some time. And we go back to the big city in the subway with people stepping on me on every side, and I look at the people and I think, oh, how beautiful. Much prettier than birds and bees and anything like that, because they are the temple of God, and the Spirit of God dwells in them. I have to tell you this one more remark of Tukey's, just because it was so cute. There were a couple of men behind us who, in their enthusiasm, were using the name of God in a disrespectful manner. Now, I told you before that the way I do when I hear anyone talking like that is to say a little prayer of adoration to the holy name, and I just love it. But this time I wasn't doing that. I hadn't found out about that yet. I just remarked to Tukey, I said, "Well, Tukey, I guess the Lord will have to forgive them. I'm sure they don't mean it, but they are just so excited." And so Tukey turned around, she said, "I think by this time that God's pretty excited himself." Now, of course, that's silly and childish, and yet, just sort of that feeling that God was there with her. Being in a baseball game didn't keep God away. He was there, taking part in everything. Well, that's the way it is. We don't want to go home and then absent ourselves from life and be holier than other people. It's rather a temptation, too, I mean, when you first hear people talking in the way that we are learning not to talk, when you first hear people griping and moaning and groaning and so on, you feel like just rushing up and saying, "Oh, don't, you're not thinking right now. You mustn't do that. You think positively, you see." But it's not very wise to do so. Or else you feel like separating yourself from them and thinking, "Oh, I don't want to have anything to do. This is going to get me down on a low plane." But that's not a good idea either, because you need them just as much as they need you. The best thing is to stay there, right among them, just being friendly with them, and then just sending them the love of Christ, and also enjoying them, enjoying all that is nice about it, enjoying their fun and all of their human interests. You know, it's pretty hard to keep your head in the stars and your feet on the ground, but I think that that's what we should do. Do both. Hold God with one hand, you see, but not lose hold of people. Some people hold on to God awfully hard, but they lose touch with people. Well, I think we want to do both. Hold people with one hand and God with another hand. There's another reason for taking part in just plain human activities and interests. Then you've got something to talk to people about, you see. You can talk their language. You can talk about the things that they talk about. Another reason for doing it. Now let me see if there are any other questions that people have asked me. And if they're not, I think we'll stop because I don't think of any others right this minute. And so I think we will stop because last night was a very long night and we don't want to keep on too long. But I will tell you though, before we stop, that tomorrow morning we're going to have a sort of a healing laboratory. We're going to let everybody come together. We're going to turn my talk into that instead of the lecture. Why are we going to have that? I think we're going to have it outdoors if the weather's good, aren't we, Sam? And any of you that feel that you would like to learn how to help others in this particular manner, because we're going to do this with the laying on of hands. It's not the only way. The way that I've been talking to you about tonight isn't that, you see. The way I've been talking about tonight mostly is the communion service, the sacraments. But we are tomorrow morning going to try this way with the laying on of hands. And so any of you that feel that you'd like to do that, why, we're going to let you do it. Len and I are going to sit there and just sort of work through you. We're going to pour the power through you and let you do it. And those of you who have been working for healing here will have a chance at that time to have that power refreshed and renewed in you. You know, you see these pretty things I'm always coming out in. Mrs. Pottinger sends me those. She's gone now, but she still sends me those every night. And together with every expression of gratitude and love that you could possibly have, bless her heart, I have a long letter from her every day, really small. And she told me to tell you about Jim. And I think I will, although probably she's run around talking to everybody about Jim whenever anyone will listen to her, hasn't she? Do you all know about Jim, or should I tell you? You don't know about Jim? Well, then some of you don't, so I'll very briefly, because she said, you be sure and tell them. She said, she wanted me to read a great long letter. Well, I'll spare you that, although it's a very lovely letter, but it would take too long. But she said, you be sure and tell them about Jim, because we want everybody to know how grateful we are. Well, 2 months ago, Jim was in a car going along, and I forget how it was, another car came this one, and another car came this way, and in trying to avoid running head-on into the one that was coming, he went over the edge of the road and over and over and over. And he had a very, very bad concussion and internal injuries that were very serious. He was bleeding inside. One shoulder broken in 3 places, and one shoulder broken in 1 place, and 1 ankle broken, and I forget whether that is all or not. But the most serious thing was the internal injuries, and they telegraphed his mother. But in the telegram they said that they did not think he could live till he got there, but to try to get there. That was at Tucson. So she telegraphed me, and the telegram finally caught up with me. I forget just where. And she went right ahead and prayed for Jim. And here was Jim, you saw him. You know Jim Covington? Oh, sure. Well, he was just perfectly fine. I mean, there wasn't a thing in the world the matter with him. The doctor said that he would be crazy from 3 months till 6 months if he did get well. I mean, when he began to recover, they said, well, he certainly can't recover in his right mind. They said he'll certainly be off his head from 3 months to 6 months. It's only 2 months. Jim says maybe that'll come in handy at school if he just to get things right. He'll just tell him, well, he's supposed to be crazy anyway. Well, I went to Tucson for just 1 day, and I saw Jim, I don't think more than 10 minutes. His mother dragged him there by the hair of the head and pushed him in the door. And he sat down and had nothing to say, and I prayed for him. He also had something wrong with his chest so that he couldn't swim. Sinuses and chest and so on and so forth. Hadn't been able to swim for, years, I guess. This was more or less a lifelong condition with the chest. Well, the other thing was all right now, so I just prayed for the chest. And so the next I heard, Jim had gotten a job at a summer camp as a swimming instructor, among other things. And there he's been ever since until he came here. Just a week before he left the camp, he got a bad cold in his head and went swimming anyway, and so it went into his ears, and he had to stop for a few days. But except for that, he's been swimming right along ever since. But now I'm going to tell you a secret. He didn't want to come here at all. He said, I wouldn't be caught dead in a place like that. And if you want to know how his mother got him here, she bribed him. She bought him a new second-hand car if he would come. And now she says, you ought to get Jim, telling everybody about the power of prayer. Now, isn't that just wonderful?
And the next sentence I read said, my husband and I just swell up every time we hear it.
Yes, our husband and I just swell up with pride every time we hear it. And she claims that Jim is entirely a new boy anyway. Says he's not the person at all that she bribed to come to camp. He's just entirely a new person. Now, you know, that's why I know that Jim will stay well. That's why I know he will stay well. Because there was that outgoing, that expression. When people would like to, want to tell the things that have happened to them, then I know that they're going to stay well. Now, of course, I mean sometimes there are reasons why it might not be advisable, but usually it's a good thing. Now, you know why I'm saying this. I'm saying this because it occurs to me that just possibly, without anybody saying, now let's all of us testify, why, it's just possible that sometime, perhaps, some of you may think that you would like to tell. Now, I don't mean just tell of spiritual benefits, because all of us have gotten spiritual benefits, I'm quite sure. And for everybody just to get up and say it's been a wonderful time and we've had marvelous spiritual benefits really is rather, well, it gets kind of boring after a while, at least it does to me. That's not what I mean. I mean of definite. Since I've been talking about healing, of course what I'm interested in is of definite physical things. Now, I say that though here, that if it pops into your head to do so at any time here, at this time before we leave, I don't know if there will be or not, why, I think it would be a lovely thing to do. I believe maybe, well, there may be a time after I go. I have to go away tomorrow night. So that's why I'm going to have my own little talk, which will turn into a healing laboratory in the morning, and I'll be here through the prayer group and then leave at night. So I think that's a good thing to do here. Because it not only is an act of gratitude, and so it keeps the power flowing in you, but also it's good for the other people here. You know, they can't look inside of you and tell whether you're better or not. And they hear a lot of talk about healing, and I think it's encouraging to them to actually know of some cases in which it is working out or has worked out. So, and that's one reason. But now it's different when you get home. When you get home, you still want to be like a light, like a city that's set on a hill whose light cannot be hid. You still want the light of God to shine through you out into the world, but you have to be very guided and very careful to know when to talk and what person to talk to. In general, I would say just don't talk and tell about it unless you know it's going to help somebody. If somebody else is in the same kind of trouble that you had or that somebody here had, then it's sometimes a good idea because you can say, why, I was like that, or I knew somebody that had just that difficulty, and you know they got well. I could tell you how to help that. You see, that gives you a perfect opening. But just to tell from the point of view of testifying or perhaps showing off a little bit or even just in our eagerness and love because we feel like broadcasting it isn't always too wise a thing. Because sometimes people get the wrong idea and it can turn them against the whole thing. Whereas if we wait for the right time, when the door is open and when they're looking for something like that, then we really can let the light shine through us. But the best way on the whole to let the light shine through us is just to demonstrate it, just to show it forth. So before we go, let's just have about half a minute of prayer for that light to come and shine through us. Dear Lord, we've been here seeking thy light. Now we know, we don't need to ask for that light to come into us, we know it is here. We know it deep inside of us that it is here. If at times toward the end of this camp it may seem to shine a little dim, we'll know that's just because in our eagerness we may have tried a little too hard. We may, some of us, be just a little tired. But that doesn't matter. It's there, underneath. It's inside of us. It's been planted in us like a little bit of leaven in a loaf, like a grain of mustard seed planted in the ground. It's been planted in us. So we just ask you to water it and let your sun shine on it and bring it forth more and more until we really do become, as Jesus told us to be, like a light, like a city that's set upon a hill whose light cannot be hid. We ask this in his name.